You may be seated if you're not. Today's a really good day. Really good day. Today's a special day. In many ways, it's a special day. Maybe every day is a special day. But today is a special day in that Donna is here. Donna. Some of you remember Donna. How many of you remember Donna? You remember Donna? Donna. From Texas, we say. I mean, not to confuse her with Donna from Alabama. Donna from Texas. She lives in Evant, Texas. We have a long story between us, among us. Do you want to say something today? Is there something you want to say? Okay. You're welcome to say something if you want to say something. I'm not asking you to say something. I'm asking if you want to. Oh, you want to, but you can't. You can't because you'd be crying too much. Yeah. Do you need to say something today? You think God wants you to say something today? You're not going to get off the hook easy now. I'm not going to make you say anything, but I'm also not going to miss that moment. I mean, you know me, and you love me anyway. So I'm going to let it pass. Now you're going to have to say. So, okay, you good? Okay. So, some things that may seem a little ironic or, I don't know, coincidental. Sometimes we put a lot of weight into that kind of stuff. And, the things Nathan and Jackie have said, they've said in a general level and on a personal level, they have spoken about New Life Church and what that means to them. And right here sits somebody that is a product of New Life Church that most of you don't know anything about. And it's just unbelievable. It's an unbelievable story sitting right there. And the first time I met her was, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago, 15 years ago. It's right back there in that room. Right back there. Her dad brought her down, and she was having a lot of difficulty in her life. And we met 2 or 3 times, and I don't remember. Some of that's so vague in my mind at this point. So you're not talking, I am. And she left after 2 or 3 visits, and I didn't see her, hear from her, and I thought, whatever. Didn't help her. I wish I could have did better. I wish I could have did different. I mean, you rethink all that stuff. And, if I'd have done this, if I'd have done that, if I'd have did this. And I didn't do any of that. And then, was it 5 years later? I don't know. See, time for me just gone. But we met at a funeral again. The next time we saw each other was something like 4 or 5 years later at a funeral, at her grandmother's funeral. And we're looking at each other, and I'm thinking, who is she? I think I know her. And she was such a completely different person. It was unbelievable. And she tells me this wild story, this unbelievable story of leaving here on that 3rd visit and just these things that happened. And she interacted with this. She had some car trouble, and this guy came along, and he gave her $500, and she went to Texas to get her life straightened out. And lo and behold, she did. And she's been on this journey with God, and I didn't have a clue about any of it. And she's just a transformed person. It's unbelievable. And we discovered that we share the same birthday, April 16th. And there's just been this miraculous stuff that's happened. And so she's visiting. She's in town this week to move her mom and dad back to Texas. They're moving to Texas. And so she came to church with us today. It's just a special day. It's one of those special days. This will only happen one time. One time. This won't happen again. It may happen another way, but it won't happen like this. So it's a need to share there when you guys were talking about the church and how the church works and sometimes what New Life is about, and and for me, and there's multiple scenarios, but one of them is that we could ask is, what's Donna worth? What's she worth? I don't know. Would we spend 15 years doing what we do so that Donna can sit there with a smile on her face? Yeah, probably so. Yeah, it's a big deal. So thank you, Jesus. So she didn't tell her story, but if you want to know it, probably after church, if you ask her some questions, she'll answer them. And she has a really good story. Really good story. We had a good week at conference. That was great. We thank you all so much for supporting us in going. It was good. The Kerygma Epic Conference. It was actually the first of the type conferences that it is. Last year, Kerygma ended the family reunion Talladega meetings that's been going on for many years. And so this conference in April at Lighthouse in Prosper, Texas is the first of many to come. And so it was new beginnings in a lot of ways. A lot of the information was foundational, and so there were a lot of things we already heard or knew, but they had packaged it together in such a way that it was dynamic. We enjoyed it. And there were a lot of folks there. I don't know how many people, but lots and lots of people were there, and we got to see people we haven't seen in a long time. Visited with some of those folks, and that was very enjoyable, seeing some of those. And then Dudley Hall and Alan Wright and Kenny Thacker did the primary main speaking, and just hearing those guys and the way they articulate the gospel is just a phenomenal experience in itself. And being there and seeing that, experiencing that in person was really good. I had some breakout sessions that had various topics, breakout sessions. Those were good as well. They had the concert on Saturday night with Allison Krauss and Ron Block and a couple other guys, Clay Hess and Earl Heese. Those are all guys that, they're big people in the music industry, and yet they were Lighthouse Christian Fellowship singing about Jesus, on Saturday night. And they did some bluegrass songs, and it was just really good. It was really good. And Allison sang on Sunday morning. We stayed over for the service. So all of that was great. One of the highlights for me was talking to T.D. Hall. His wife recently passed away. They've been married something like 200 years or something like that. I don't know, what was it, 60 years maybe? Or he's 85. Probably more than 60 years. Anyway, they've been married a long time, and she just passed away. And, he could tell that things about him are different in different ways. And I spent some time speaking to him, and that was a highlight of the trip for me, talking with TD and just hearing his heart and watching him cry and talk about Jesus and all that. It's just wonderful. He's just such a delightful man. And he's one of our mentors that we've related to through the years. So I really enjoyed it. So anyway, we thank you for the opportunity to go to Texas and experience all that. It was good. And notice Dave playing drums. Yeah, y'all see that? Yeah. So you don't have to hold that stick. You just stick it up in there, and then you don't have to hold it. You just kind of... Okay. Cool enough. Cool enough. Yeah. Yeah. As usual for those conferences, for me, there's always affirmation for me. Going and hearing and sharing and those things. The things they're saying, the way they're giving counsel, direction. Many times those things end up being affirmation for me and where we are, what we've been thinking, the direction that we're going. And so that was true once again for me, that Sometimes back here, we feel somewhat isolated at times, It's like we're in our own little world or whatever. And sometimes you can start to question things, and are we going the right direction? Are we doing the right things? And so going to conferences, the Kerygma conferences, for me through the years have been affirmation of, yeah, you're on the right track. Just keep steady, hang on, keep going. And so I got that once again. Things we'd been thinking about and talking about were the very same things they were talking about. And so that helps me to know that we are hearing God, we are following Him, we're pursuing through, and I'm excited about that. Most of the time, I want to see more happening than I'm seeing happen. And then there's days when Donna shows up and it's like, wow, it's okay, it's all right, it's okay. It took a while, but it happened. And so sometimes we need to have that perspective that the things we're doing, we do what we know to do, best we know to follow and obey God. We do that. The rest of it's up to Him. I go out every day and look at those tomato plants, and man, I can water them and I can put fertilizer around them, and I did that. But I have a difficult time putting blooms on them. I can't get that down. I keep trying, but it just don't work, But one day you walk out there, like yesterday you walk out there, and there's a tomato on that thing. I mean, you know the analogy. We keep doing what we know to do that are the dynamics of the gospel. We keep speaking the gospel and obeying the gospel and following the gospel, and then there's fruit comes from that. There's fruit comes from that. And when that happens, you can't explain it. And I don't mean to make this about Donna, and I'm not going to, but man, it's a good analogy. I mean, what happened between us, I promise you, I don't think I did anything at all to benefit her. So she's shaking her head, yes. But from my perspective, it's like, I could have did a whole lot better or different. And I remember that she told me 4 or 5 years later, there was one thing especially that made a huge difference to her. And I think, if I can quote you right, it was the way I looked at her. And she said, you looked at me like I mattered, or didn't look at you like you was what? What'd she say? Interpret.
Like anyone different.
Oh. So we stay true to the gospel, the dynamics of the gospel. God does the fruit. He does all that. Has anybody ever asked you, do you love me? Has anybody ever asked you that? Do you love me? Has there? Give me a little nod if it's a yes. Yeah. I mean, surely everybody in here has been asked that question, do you love me? Do you love me? And you've probably asked somebody that question, haven't you? Do you love me? I remember being kids, that was a big deal when we were small children. We had girlfriends, boyfriends, back then. And remember them little love notes? Some of you probably still writing them. But them little love notes. And the biggest thing you wrote was, I love you, do you love me? Y'all remember that? Did y'all do that? What? Yeah, okay, yeah, you got to check one. I love you, do you love me? I mean, those were cute little things we did, but, we were asking that question, do you love me, do you love me? Of course, we start growing up a little bit, and then that question means something a little different. I mean, then it's all kind of in innocence, and we don't even know what we mean by it. We get to be teenagers now. Somebody asks you when you're a teenager, they say, do you love me? Well, now it means something a little different. It kind of means, I don't know what the current word is. I'm behind on my terminology, but did we still go steady? Did we do that? Did y'all go steady?
They call it going out.
Oh, okay. So y'all didn't go steady? Y'all not going steady? Hanging out. You want to hang out?
You're not going together, but you're going out.
Okay, so you're not going together, you're going out, but don't be hooking up. Right?
Yeah, don't hook up.
Don't be hooking up. The reason that's so funny is when I was in the lunch line at the conference, there was a lady in front of me that was brand new to all of this. Her friend had heard Alan Wright on the radio, and they came to this conference, didn't know a soul. And she's in front of me in the lunch line. And so she starts asking me questions, and we start getting to know one another, and then she introduced my friend. Well, Renee, was it Renee? Yes. Renee told who? Renee told Susan that Pastor Bobby hooked up with a couple of women while we were at the conference. So I'm just clarifying, don't be hooking up. Do you love me? That's the question. So when we're teenagers and a little older, we start asking that question. It means, are you getting serious? You're going to make a commitment. Of course, after you get married, then there's a whole different dynamic to that question, isn't there? You know, and once you're married, if somebody says, do you love me? Now it's not so much the answer you give as the timing to the answer. Y'all know that, don't you? Y'all need to learn. Especially you, Nathan, need to pay real close attention. If she said, do you love me? Well, if you answer too quick, then, well, you know, hey, you didn't even put any thought into that. What? Yeah, you just said that because you know it's the right answer. You're supposed to say it. But if you wait too long, then it's like, well, did you have to think about it? Y'all know that's true, right? Y'all know that. Do you love me? I mean, it seems like an innocent little question. Do you love me? And then there's a whole word love that we use these days. I mean, we use the word love all the way from loving God to loving ice cream, or, you know, loving your wife, or loving the beach. And, you know, and depending on what kind of ice cream, which beach, I mean, if it's Cherry Garcia, we got some competition going on. You know, so that word love, I mean, it carries a lot of different, you know, meanings to us when we're asking that question or thinking about that. Love. And for most of us, when we're talking about love, we're talking about some emotion or feeling, some kind of affection, usually is what we're talking about. And a lot of times we're looking for a specific response or reaction from that question. There's something we want to hear, something that we need in order to, I don't know, make a decision or feel good or reciprocate. Love. One of the things that I heard from the conference out of the women in the Word breakout session, I didn't attend that, although I could have, being Sister Bobby and all. I could have. But one of the things I heard out of that was the speaker said that grace has a face. Isn't that good? Grace has a face. And so the idea behind that is, you know, personifying the characteristics, the attributes of God, personifying that on a relational level. So it brings grace from being kind of something about God to being personified as God. So grace is part of who He is. And so it just changes that dynamic a little bit. So in thinking about that, and I'd been pondering on this sermon idea here for several weeks, and I was thinking about love. You know, love is a person. You just think about that. Apostle John said it very clearly. He said, God is love. So, you know, love is not just something God does, it's who He is. So love is a person. And it's more than a feeling or an affection. It is a person. Something for us to engage and embrace on a deep level. And God's calling us deeper into that. That's what the song said. You know, that song was really speaking out to me and some of my thoughts as we were doing that. I mean, He says He's calling us deeper and deeper into His love. Isn't that what He said? And that's wild. So when you're thinking about that question, do you love me? And so what if God were to ask you, do you love me? What if God did? What if God asked you that? And I don't want you to answer out loud. I want you to think about it. I want you to ponder that. I want it to go way down deep in you and think about God Himself asking you, do you love me? So there's probably a lot of reactions, a person could have to that, depending on where you are in your life and relationship with Him. Do you love me? And I imagine those things in different emphases, like, do you love me? Or do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And maybe God has asked you that question. Maybe He has. If not, I think it's a valid question. I think it is a valid thing to think about, that God would at some point, for the right reasons, ask you or inquire through His Spirit to you about your love to Him. If not, at least it's something you evaluate in your own mind, don't you? I mean, do you ever think about whether you love God or not? I mean, do you ever ponder that? Do you ever go over that? Do you just act on assumption that, well, sure, I love God? I mean, is that how you do? Or do you want to meditate on that and find in your own self where you feel good about or confident about loving God? It's a big deal these days, loving God. We hear a lot about that. I see a lot of slogans on a lot of churches that says, love God, love people. Y'all see those? I'm not sure if I like them or not. I haven't decided. I don't think I do. I'm still working that out. Not that either one of those are bad. I'm just not sure it's a good slogan for the church to have. Here's my problem with that. You see, this is somewhere over in the Bible, in the New Testament. I think it's in Matthew, and I think I was looking it up a while ago. I think it's Matthew 22, but I can't be certain. There's another place too, but where they were trying to trip Jesus up, and they came up and said, "Hey, what's the greatest commandment?" And Jesus said, "Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two things hang all the law and the prophets." And so now it seems that, a lot of folks are attributing that to the church. But I don't see that Jesus ever instituted that to His disciples. I see that as a restating of the Old Covenant. A very accurate restating. I mean, Jesus did good with that, didn't He? I mean, He restated the law, and in restating the law, He said, well, here's the essence of the law, is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and your neighbor as yourself. But I never see where Jesus instituted that upon the Christian church. So that's my problem with that. I'm still trying to work some of that out, okay? But the way I see love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, whoever did that? Whoever did that? So the law, when you think about the law, and I'm just going to say some very paraphrased things here without a lot of foundational support. So, if you have issues with that, please let me know later or write to me or something. And, if you're listening to this on the radio or whatever, then, write to me. Post Office Box 1996 35056. But think about this, that the law really, God gave people something that was hard to do. Impossible to do. That's what the law was. So if that's the law, if that's summing it up, it's impossible to do. And we always say that nobody ever lived up to the law except Jesus. which is the big deal of the gospel. Jesus did, and that's really important. But nobody else did. And if you can't keep the first one, how in the world are you going to keep the rest of them? I mean, you know. Right? I mean, if you don't get love the Lord your God, love the Lord thy God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. If you don't get that one, then the rest of them, do they even matter? You see my point? My point is that's impossible to do. It's hard to do. And yet we have a lot of people, I think, in some kind of a mindset that wants to. They're sincere in their devotion to God and their commitment to God and want to express love to God. I mean, don't you have that inside of you? Don't you have a drive or something in you where you want to say to God, yes, I love you? I mean, when you're asked that question by someone, I mean, well, most of the time, you want to say, yes, I love you. Yes, I mean, you want to be able to say that with the right timing and the right nuance and, you know, everything just right. You want to express that with the deepest part of your heart of, yes, yes, I love you. And isn't that the response you want to have to God? That if He were to ask you, or your response is, yes, yes, I love you. And yet, all of us, don't we know our own selves to know, I don't love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I know myself well enough to know that there's some gray areas in there. You willing to go there with me? So I have a little problem with trying to get that stuff around in my mind and heart of relating to God on a real level where I can be honest with Him and myself in loving Him. Do I love Him? Do I love Him with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? Do you love me? You know, probably the first thing most of us are going to do, maybe not, maybe not, but some of us is going to do, is if we're asked that question, the first thing we do a lot of times is we go to our checklist and start checking off everything that we've done or not done that disqualifies us from saying yes. If God were to say, do you love me? Then we think about what we did last summer or last year or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And our mental checklist, we start going through all these things that we disqualify ourselves. We see in John chapter 21, and if y'all want to turn there, you can. Jesus asked that very question to Simon Peter. Now, how would you like to have been in those shoes? Jesus looking at Peter after the resurrection, and Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? Now, how many of you have aspired to be like Simon Peter? Right? I mean, we look at the heroes in the Bible sometimes like, yeah, I want to be like Paul, or yeah, I want to be like Peter. Well, maybe in some aspects, but in other aspects, it's like, ooh, that was one of those moments, I don't know if I'd wanted to have been Peter. Do you love me? Now, there's a whole context of this that I'm not going to go into today, just for time's sake, but, you know, Jesus had denied, Peter had denied Jesus. You remember that? I mean, to the point that he swore an oath when the last girl said, hey, yeah, you're one of that Nazarene. And he swore with an oath that said, no, I do not know that man. So it wasn't just a case of bad memory or, you know, what just, oh no, I don't know that guy. No, he was put on the spot to the point that he deliberately and intentionally, adamantly denied knowing Jesus Christ. And the only reason I can think of that he would do that was because he was afraid. He was going to die too, or they were going to torture him. I mean, why else? So fear. And so here's the man, Jesus, that he'd been following for 3.5 years, and then he denied him, and now Jesus is saying, do you love me? Nope. I denied you, remember? Did you forget that? You've been resurrected. Your memory not so hot. I rejected you. Then just a few days ago, Jesus, I denied knowing you. Nope. I don't love you. I mean, seriously. I'm thinking of myself and now, thinking how I might react. Do you love me? I'd be like, yes. Well, no. Well, maybe. Well, I want to. I want to. Do you love me? Do you love me? You got to read that whole story to appreciate it all, and it's not really my point today that I'm trying to make, but it's a beautiful story of Peter's failure and denial and Jesus restoring him. It's a beautiful story. And we need to read that and be familiar with that because Peter is restored. Without condemnation, Jesus didn't say, I told you so, and he did tell him so. He didn't bring any condemnation. He didn't make him feel bad. He didn't make him explain. He didn't say, Peter, tell me what happened back there right before that rooster crowed. He didn't do any of that. He loved him and restored him. And so I was thinking about loving, because Peter's response to Jesus, I don't know, I like it. I think I'm going to use it. But I'm thinking, okay, it's hard for me to get the dichotomy of all that. But Peter's answer, his response, when Jesus said, do you love me? Peter said, you know that I do. Do you like that? You know that I do. In spite of what just happened a few days before, Peter says, you know that I do. What better answer can you answer to the resurrected Christ? Right? He's right there looking at you. He knows everything. It's like, well, so there's no real need in trying to lie right here, There's no need in trying to fudge this. Let's just be honest. You know that I do. You know that I love you. So I'm pondering over in my heart and mind and life what loving God means. What loving God means. I'm doing that on a lot of areas, as a matter of fact, in my life. I just turned 60, so now I'm in the, finally I arrived. Pastor AJ down at Birmingham told me there's like 4 stages to life, and he had them kind of laid out in some years, but I don't even know if I can remember. They were learning and living, loving, and leaving. And he said that's like 4 stages of life. And he said a lot of times when people come into the decade of the 60s on, it's a matter of thinking about what you're going to leave. And it's not that you're trying to leave, but your mindset has more to do with, okay, when I leave, what am I going to leave and how am I going to leave it? And so I've been feeling a little of that. It begins to matter more about what's life about. So I've been thinking about love. What really does loving somebody mean? Anybody. What does that really mean? And then it becomes more specific. What does it mean to love your family? What does that mean? What does it mean to love your spouse? What does that mean? What does it mean to love God? And so a lot of times I think there's these kind of ethereal type things, and our culture's putting all this stuff on us that they want to pile on us. And so a lot of times we feel like failures, or we feel like we're coming up short in so many ways in those things that I'm really searching for what's real and true. And so if I want to spend my whole life, the rest of my life, loving God, what's that look like? I sure don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that loving God was not what I did my whole life. Right? And what I find when I begin to try to relate to God, and sometimes we want to love God and we want to give Him praise. We want to worship Him. Those are valid things. We want to say words to Him, You're great, you're wonderful, you're awesome, I praise you, you're magnificent. But, I say all of that, I say the things, and that caused me to start thinking about the love languages. Y'all have heard of the love languages? There's 5 love languages, and I'm not sure if they're all valid or what, but was it Gary Chapman, I think, wrote a book about the love languages, and I think there are some validity to them. I'm not saying they're not. I don't know how much emphasis to put on them, but the point that he was making was that different people receive love differently, and learning somebody's love language is a way to help express your commitment to them. So I figure if there are love languages, God has them all. Don't you think? I mean, He is love, so that's where they started out. But pondering that, and I think a great dilemma that we have in our culture is that a lot of people are wanting to love people in their own love language. And we're wanting them to receive our love according to the way we want to love them. Y'all see that happening? Rather than being sensitive to the other person and how they receive love, and learning how they feel loved, and then loving them in a way that they feel loved. Y'all with me? Y'all with me so far? And so there's responsibility on the giver and the receiver of those love language things. And I think either side can get out of balance with that. But I was carried that a little further over to think about God. I mean, how do I say to God, I love you? I mean, just because I utter those words out of my mouth, do they really mean anything to Him? I mean, just because I want to love Him or feel like I love Him, do I love Him? How does He see that? How does He receive that? How does He want me to be? I mean, y'all tracking with me, right? This introspection of all that. And so all that's led to these thoughts I just have been sharing with you. And I'm coming to some conclusion about some of that. I think there's always a good place and time for us to say good things to God and to worship Him, to praise Him, to do all those things. But I think a lot of the things people do to say I love God doesn't say I love God at all. I think to Him they're just stuff. It's just noise or activity. So I don't think God has a love language that He operates in. He wants us to figure it out. None of that. But I do think that there's a way that He wants us to say, I love you. I think that God has worked in such a way that He has designed it for it to be easy for us to love God, to love Him. If under the old covenant, loving the Lord your God, heart, soul, mind, strength, whatever, that was something that's hard to do, that's impossible to do. The new covenant is completely opposite from that. It is something easy to do, enjoyable to do. You see, because the new covenant is so far removed from the old covenant, and Jesus has did everything and finished all the work necessary for us to enjoy God on every level in the new covenant. So therefore, to be able to say I love God in the new covenant, it's got to be easy, right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be simple. It can't be complicated and hard. And we got bunches of people running around trying to love God or wanting to love God and can't, and there just can't be confusion about that. God's not that way. He has brought simplification and enjoyment to relating to Him. So in my heart and mind, I'm thinking, okay, we got to get this worked out, God. Somehow this has got to flow smoother and easier so that I can enjoy this more, so that I don't go around feeling like I don't love God. So I don't run around with this underlying idea that, well, I know I'm supposed to love God and I want to love God, but secretly I know I'm not loving God. So I don't want to live like that. And I don't think that's the right way to live. So what is it, God? What's up with that? So there was one clue here for me when He responded to Peter. He said to Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, you know that I do. And I'm summing all three of those up. I'm not getting into all of the the whole restoration and that. All that's a good story. But Jesus' general response to Peter when he said, "Do you love me?" How many of you know without looking, what was the general response that Jesus gave to Peter? Feed my sheep. Now, he's not giving us Peter's command. So this is a specific command. So don't misunderstand that Jesus is saying to every Christian, go feed my sheep. That's not what he's saying. But notice the focus for Jesus when he's calling Peter out of that denial, calling him back into close, intimate relationship with himself and saying, do you love me? Because he's giving Peter a chance to come clean. He's giving Peter a chance to come free and to come to him and be restored. And Jesus has every opportunity to ask for anything he wants. He didn't ask for anything for himself. And I'm paraphrasing the words. But he says to Peter, he said, I want you to take care of my people. I want you to love what I love, Peter. I want you to love who I love. I want you to take care of them. If you love me, Peter, then that's what I want you to do for me. I want you to take care of them. Is that not awesome to you? I mean, I don't know. Is that as awesome to you as it was me? And when I begin seeing this in a greater way, it's like, oh, wow, this... And there's some things you've always heard and always know, and then all of a sudden they make sense. It's like, oh, why didn't I see that 10 years ago? You know, in our Shame Off You class, somebody said, well, 40 years I've been doing this. I'm just now seeing this. 40 years. Isn't that the way you feel sometimes? So then let's remember and bring this thing to a conclusion. Jesus said, I give you a new covenant. A new command, I give you a new command. A new commandment. If the old covenant commandment was love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. I don't see where Jesus instituted that onto his disciples, and yet he did say, I give you a new commandment. Y'all remember that, right? And y'all can quote that, right? What was that new commandment? Love one another as I have loved you. Something that everybody can do. Something everybody can do. Something that's easy. Did you know that you are empowered to love the way you've been loved? And do you know that that's what's wrong with the world? They're loving the way they've been loved. I mean, that's why we have all the problems we have. People are being loved the way they're loving, the way they've been loved. And the answer to the world and the solution and the whole concept of church and all that God is in Christianity, I believe it can be wrapped up in the idea and concept of you love one another the way Jesus has loved you. So I think for God, what He wants and what He would be saying is, if you love me, love one another. See, He's not calling for us to fall down before Him on our face and put sackcloth on like they did in the Old Testament and, do all this rituals. And He's not asking for any of that. He's moved away from that because Jesus, the focus and the definition of all of that has come. The substance is here now, so we don't have to go through those rituals and those ceremonial things to be clean and all that stuff, because Jesus has once and for all come and instituted all of that. So now God says, love one another as I've loved you. That is His command. That is how He wants you to love Him. So we have some misfocus, I think, going on in and among the church because we don't understand what's most important to God. And the thing that's most important to Him is how you love one another. There's nothing else on this earth that's more important to God than how you do that, how well you do that. And there's even confusion in loving the world so many times we're made to think that we're supposed to love the world more than the people in the world, more than anything else. And don't misunderstand, we should love sinners and we should care about sin. All that's valid. But if you look at scriptures really closely, all the one another's are about the church. There's not a lot of emphasis on loving the world. There's not a lot of emphasis. There are some commands for the church to have towards the world. So here's the way that works. When the church is loving one another the way that Jesus loves us, the world sees that and is drawn to it. Loving the world doesn't necessarily save the world. You all know we've loved a lot of people that never responded positively to that. They wasted a lot of time and resources, we think. We don't call them wasted because we give what we give, and that's the best chance they had, and we're glad to do that. But we know a lot of folks don't respond to love, right? So loving the world's not really the answer. Loving one another and then the Holy Spirit shining the light on that so that they can see a very real place to be loved, that's what the world's looking for. So I'm going to close this just by making the point I've said, is I believe that if God says, "Do you love me?" And our answer is, "You know that I do." And his response is, "Love one another the way I've loved you." Wow. Now that's a dream I have. That's a vision I have. That's a desire that I have that I think you all share and lots of other people share. Could we see a group of people genuinely loving one another the way Jesus has loved us? Is that possible? And if that's possible, what would that do? What would that produce? I think that's the goal of the church. That's the vision of the church. That's how disciples are produced, is when the environment is set and the dynamics are right, and the church is loving one another the way we're supposed to, then disciples come out of that. People respond to the gospel out of that. People see God for who He really is out of that. And we don't just make converts and we don't just try to solve people's problems. No, we introduce them to God, who is the creator of all things. Love one another as I have loved you, I believe, is the best way to say, "God, I love you." That simplifies it for me. It gives me something to focus on. It gives me a channel and a way to exercise certain things, because I can see people, I can see one another, and I can make commitments. Let's pray. Father God, we are